Welcome to the Science for Sport podcast, where we dive into stories and insights that drive peak performance. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind the science of success. Here's your host, Richard Graves.
Hello and welcome to the Science for Sport podcast with me, Richard Graves. In this week's episode, we're going to look at psychology and the impact it's had on one of the toughest disciplines in world sport, elite level rowing. This week's guest is arguably better placed than anybody else to discuss this topic because Dr. Chris Shambrook was the team psychologist for the GB rowing team between 1997 and 2019, a period when GB rowing went from strength to strength. So let's hear from him now.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Well, Chris, thanks for jumping on this week's edition of the Science for Sport podcast with us. I know you're a busy man because formerly the team psychologist for the GB rowing team, now performance director at Planet K2 as you look to transfer those skills into the corporate world as well. But if you can, for those people that aren't familiar with your story, give them a brief resume and how you came to be in this position.
Yes, a brief resume. Thanks for the invitation to be here. Really looking forward to the conversation. So, I started out years ago doing a sports science degree. Then I got a fascination for sports psychology, did my PhD. And while I was doing my PhD, qualified as a sports psychologist, but then lectured on sports science degrees, got a great role with the British rowing team back in 1997, did quite a lot of other applied sports psychology work. So worked with the England and Wales Cricket Board, worked with Cambridge University Boat Race Club, Sunderland Football Club, Northamptonshire County Cricket, Nick Faldo Golf, all sorts of stuff. And eventually decided that was a great world to be in. So left the lecturing world and moved into consultancy, and then sort of in 2003 Planet K2 was born, which is now the kind of organisation that I'm performance director of, and we've been helping the world to kind of see performance as a force for good, not a problem to be solved in all that time, because the business world and the sporting world are very different in terms of how they see performance and results. And so, my resume has taken me into a world where I'm now kind of taking performance psychology and applying it to many and varied environments rather than just the first love of sport and kind of being sort of involved in that, and written a couple of books along the way and done various other interesting things. But it's kind of that's the potted history in a relatively short space of time.
It's quite a CV. I've got to say, when I was flicking through it, the first thing that struck me was you couldn't possibly at the time when you joined Team GB rowing have picked a tougher environment in many respects, because 1997 you came on board. That's within 12 months of one of, if not the worst Olympic Games performance by Team GB across the board ever. So the obvious question is why?
Yeah, so I got lucky, and I have defined myself as serially lucky throughout my career. And if I'm going to be a psychologist helping other people, I don't think that's a bad outlook to have. But lottery funding started around 1997 as well. So after the Atlanta Olympics, there was a different look on, how do we fund Olympic sport? So it was really serendipitous that Brian Miller, who was the incumbent psychologist at British Rowing, he decided to sort of step back, and I went through an interview process, got involved in British Rowing, and the timing was right. So, at the very sort of outset of lottery funding coming in, and we've seen the impact of that across the whole of the UK Olympic system and wider since that time as well. So, but I was in some ways fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time, and having just co-authored a book as well, that was kind of good sort of leverage to be able to use, that here's this sort of relatively young psychologist who seems to have been sort of having some skills that are appropriate, and then rowing was it was the only gold medal sport from 1996 with Redgrave and Pinsent, and so I just thought, well, if I can get this would be great, and it'll be a really great place to sort of be part of. Why? Because I really wanted to get into that world and see what a difference I could make, having been a sports fan for years and a sport Billy myself, master of all trades, jack of all trades, master of none, just a great opportunity to kind of cut my teeth in Olympic sport.
You see, it's interesting. Right off the bat there, you talk about it as being extremely lucky, being a great opportunity. But for those of us that were around in 1996, the pressure on Team GB and the whole GB Olympic setup was enormous because Redgrave and Pinsent were the only people to gold medal at Atlanta 96. And if anything, there was a lot of criticism around the whole setup, and a lot of an inquest was ongoing at the time. So for a lot of people, they will have looked at that situation and said, well, it's not for me. You, in stark contrast, were directly the opposite.
Yeah, yes, and also sort of having the previous few years and had my PhD. So at the University of Brighton where I was, Peter Keane was in the office next door. So Peter Keane revolutionised British cycling, became the head of UK sport. After he worked there. So I got to work alongside Pete as a lab assistant. So I got to test Chris Boardman. And be part of him preparing for a world hour record, having won his gold medal in 1992 at Barcelona on the Lotus bike. I'd regularly seen Chris in and around the labs, and Professor Andy Jones, who was a contemporary of mine, who I used to share a flat with. Andy is the guy who was doing great physiological work very early on in his physiology career. Paula Radcliffe was regularly in the laboratory, and so I got to see Paula Radcliffe full testing, max VO2, got to interview her. So I got this thing in my head that, I just see these great people, and now I've got an opportunity to move into here. I wasn't really focused on the context. It was more a case of, there's something here, let's see what I can be part of, because the Olympics is going to continue independent of how successful the entire team has been. So I was just kind of in a space of well, if Pete King can do this type of stuff with Chris Boardman, and Andy's doing this type of stuff with Paula Radcliffe, and Andy, has gone on to do stuff, behind the first sub 2 hour marathon as consulted around that. So, this kind of, I was around people who were just kind of thinking that, this stuff is just great and anything is possible if we apply the science in the right way.
How did that then go on to influence what you would do in subsequent years with GB rowing? Because I imagine, thinking particularly of Chris Boardman and cycling, the two disciplines aren't that dissimilar in terms of, yes, you're competing against people, but once you're out there on the track or you're out there on the water, quite often it's you against your own mind at times.
Yeah, and so that's the beautiful thing about the psychology of sport. So when I was working in cricket, that's kind of individuals against individuals in a team context. And if I'm doing stuff at a football club, you've got an invasion game, and then you've got rowing where actually it's just there's the endurance as well as the skill component, but you're not interacting with the opposition. Then doing golf where it's totally the individual against themselves and the course. And so you've got this, for me, that fascination of the similarities and differences between sports, and then kind of helping athletes and coaches win their mind game. That was the bit that really fascinated me. So it was, where I can't remember which year it was, but we did have a joint meeting between the rowing scientist and the cycling scientist up in Manchester, and kind of exchanging sort of practices and ideas and thoughts. And that was the thing that for me, it was just like, this is just helping people solve the problem of being mentally ready, mentally fit for purpose. We've got all this brilliant science on helping people be physiologically at the margins of potential. What are we doing to build the same thing mentally? Because again, psychology has typically been, have you got an issue, get it sorted, rather than how do we create that capacity, a mindset of abundance, how do we get more of this? And that was the bit for me that was just kind of, well, I want to be part of this adding, not waiting for something to be broken before I become relevant.
When you look at the subsequent Olympics, Chris, in 2000, Team GB won 3 medals, 2 of which were gold. 4 medals in 2004 Athens, 6 in Beijing, 9 was most successful in London 2012. It is a gradual upturn in performance and achievement there. So from when you went in to when you reached the zenith, if you like, in 2012, what was the thing that you tried to influence most? What was the biggest change that you saw in the rowers?
So what are the key thing? There was this increasing confidence in terms of the system that had been created and of the infrastructure that was around them. So I think helping people be aware of the opportunity that exists because you are coming into an environment that knows what it's doing, it has a track record, and how do we pay this forward, whilst not being overwhelmed by it. So, and it's a really interesting balance to kind of walk into the environment at Caversham and see all of the history of the people who have gone before and the medals that have been won, and think I can be next on the board. But at the same time, when you're tired and in the middle of a really heavy block of training, you can walk in there and kind of go, oh my God, the weight of responsibility for adding to this is really quite challenging. So confidence for me was always a really big area about how do you get individual confidence and then collective confidence so that you're getting this additive component. And confidence for me is probably the most important psychological quality. So if you can try and intentionally sort of get an epidemic of that going through a culture, that's no bad thing. And definitely when you see the Redgrave confidence handover that happened to Pinsent, and then Pinsent then hands over to Andy Triggs-Hodge and to Pete Reed, and you kind of see this continuity of belief. But as you get more people, it's not just down to a couple of characters. So it's kind of, it was encouraging everyone to sort of say, you can benefit from this, but you could possibly be handing the baton over next as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing to see it; it's another to actually believe it. And the unique thing for me, at least, as a casual observer, when you look at Pinsent and particularly Redgrave, is you always felt that he was almost willing himself to success, no matter how tired he felt, no matter how much energy had been sapped. Whenever you hear Stephen Redgrave speak, there's this steely determination, this will to win, this desire not to be defeated. That isn't something necessarily that can be taught. That's got to come from within.
And the key thing for me was allowing people to recognise their personalities and their version of whatever was going to be their secret sauce. So, Steve, I learnt a huge amount from Steve and Jürgen Grobler and Matthew Pinsent and the experience that they had. So, and that was part of my mindset. I'm not going to teach them very much, I don't think, but what can I glean that I think is important? So, Steve's philosophy, on my worst day, I want to be good enough to beat anyone else in the rest of the world. Okay, if that's a mindset, what does that mean?
It's an incredible mindset.
Isn't it? Absolutely. And sort of couple that with, I want to be the worst rower in any boat that I'm in with my track record, but I'm going to make sure that I'm helping other people push on beyond me. And if I'm the worst and I'm helping everyone be better, that's stepping into that space of competitive collaboration, which kind of go, I can't win on my own. I need other people. But if I'm going to do that, how do I go about making me great, but also supporting and challenging other people? And then you sort of see the likes of sort of Catherine Granger coming in 1997, started in the same year that I did. And kind of, you're just seeing someone who came alive during racing, and a brilliantly sort of, a great spirit, great competitor. Helen Glover, equally competitive. But then you've got, Matthew Pinsent. I think, Matthew was just brilliant at managing energy and would never use more effort than was required to deliver a result via a great performance. Knew when to dig deep when he needed to, but, and then it's just, there's these personality differences that you can't. And that was the bit for me. Don't try and teach a single model of mental capability or mental toughness or whatever. Help people work out, who am I and what makes me tick, and how can I elevate the strengths that I've got, and then add in some additional ways of thinking in training or competition that add to me, rather than I've got to be like that person, but I don't think I am. Because that's a confidence sapper straight away, rather than celebrate yourself more and add to it, is a confidence builder.
Yeah, like you say, it's definitely not a case of one size fits all, especially at this level of elite sports. So in that respect then, how did your method and your approach change depending on who the individual was in front of you?
So the method stays pretty consistent, but the answers that you get back determine the extent to which you're kind of going, actually, you're a worrier. And I don't want to stop you worrying. I want to use that worry as a director toward positive action. Whereas actually now I'm talking to someone else who seems to be sort of on a roll of optimism and belief, that I don't want to kind of try and get any pragmatism in the way of that. But how do we build that kind of optimism with balance and contrast? And even when you're, if I was working with a pair or a double, and you've got quite contrasting approaches to racing, or what success is and what failure is, we talk about that. So for me, the method was, let's be clear, let's raise self-awareness, let's raise self-acceptance. I'm aware of who I am and the strengths and the benefits of that, and maybe some of the holdback, and I'm aware of what I can do to enhance the good stuff and maybe add to it. So and if you do that with individuals, you help build that awareness, acceptance, and development. So it's a growth curve, like physiology. You're not going to change muscle makeup, but you are going to provide a training program that allows the physiology to be used in a most effective way and add in other stuff that is required from a sport perspective.
I'm glad you mentioned the team aspect of rowing there, because we've spoken about how do you deal with individuals one-on-one. Obviously, men's 8, coxless 4, the team side of rowing. Each boat is made up of individuals. To be successful in a team event, those individuals have got to be cohesive and work together. At elite level sport, no matter what the sport is, you're going to have egos. That's part and parcel of how you get to that level. So how do you go about bringing all making the sum total of the parts greater than any one individual?
Yeah, and so the coach is on a day-to-day doing a brilliant job of kind of working with the reality of that kind of, the marauding mass of personalities in action. And so giving the technical direction, providing the training program structure so that they're experiencing that growth together. The coach is orchestrated a great environment where there's, 2 or 3 outings a day, where there is, what's the aim of the session, let's go and execute it and let's debrief. So there's some brilliant practices that allow the psychology to then be understood more. So my role with the crews was always much more about, let's be even more intentional about how you use this creation of a shared mental model, the execution of shared intention, and the evaluation of what's just been delivered in a collective way that feeds forward to upgraded belief in self, each other, and the unit. And that was the bit that came to me very early. So a confidence triangle. I need to be confident in me, I need to be confident in each other member, and I need to be confident in the entity that we are creating. And just helping people regularly think about, so what is it that we're trying to create together, both performance and result-wise? What do I need to know about the other people and sort of, have confidence from them? And what do I need to be projecting from me in order that others are confident in me to contribute to what we're doing together? So that triangle of me, you, us was always in the back of my head around how do we have conversations that just keep this sense of interdependence, having its own focus and own language and no assumptions around anything.
Yeah, and ultimately getting the best out of everybody involved, no doubt. I wonder, in the 22 years, Chris, that you were involved with Team GB Rowing, we spoke about the very start and coming from a relatively low point with Atlanta Olympics in '96. Was there a moment, a month, a year, if you like, in that cycle where you saw it as a bit of a light switch moment, when there was a tipping point when perhaps the guys, the women on the water didn't see certain situations in the race so much as a threat to their mindset, but embraced them, talk about Steve Redgrave, and took it as a challenge?
Yeah, so the whole threat challenge approach was very much part of the push for 2016 anyway. So my associate professor role that I had at University of Staffordshire was kind of with Mark Jones, Jamie Barker. At the time, they invited me in as well. And that was really helpful, that threat challenge psychology. And I'd encourage everyone to kind of look at the theory of challenge and threat states. And I think the ongoing process isn't to get a switch. So it's about, I just was very clear about, I'm going to keep talking about the fact that we've chosen to do this. How do you make it a challenge? What's some of the stuff that inevitably you might find a threat that we can actually reframe and look at in a different way? So the biggest thing for me as well, and I think this potentially helped by my dog and training her as well, that the training was just consistent, because she was just a very willful dog. And this is kind of the psychology of help, it's kind of go, I'm not going to change her, but I can keep helping her kind of at least listen to me, particularly when she's on a scent. But athletes are the same. There's always going to be a new sort of thing to look at. There's something going to be to worry about, or my energy levels change and my psychology changes. So I don't think there was necessarily a specific moment, but that ability to increasingly accept the reality of what we've signed up for, accept the fact that things don't always go smoothly, and sometimes they go more smoothly than we'd expect, and just be ready to bring consistent practices to make sense and take action. So I taught from my first Olympics out, one of the big things, and I still use it, I was using it yesterday in a meeting, become the consistent factor in an inconsistent environment. If you can do that psychologically, having accepted that environment you've gone into, you get to become ever better at solving the problem of shifting context around you. I'm the consistent factor in an inconsistent environment. And there's another phrase that gets used: you happen to things, things don't happen to you. And that as an underpinning philosophy of, if you're going to thrive in this environment, we need to be ready to keep going, whether we're delighted or frustrated or anywhere in between. And that, for me, a rowing being an endurance sport. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Is that the overriding message that you would give then to any young psychologists looking to make their way, coaches working in a sporting team environment? Is that the thing that underpins it all for you?
That for me is very important in terms of accepting who I am, why I want to do this, and what comes with the territory if I choose to do it. And what does that mean that I'm going to consistently need to be good at? Because elite performance is not a point of arrival. It's an ongoing curiosity and desire to kind of think, again, relatively early on in my career, I kind of coined the 100% mentality, which is, I've got a diminishing capability because of age, but my ability to get more out of what I've got is better because I'm smarter. And that that can be the difference between Monday and Friday, rather than sort of end of career and beginning career. I'm feeling 4 out of 10 ready today, but I can make it 4 out of 4. Or I'm feeling 9 out of 10, I'd make it 9 out of 9. But and that for me is just a really important bit of, if you're going to be an athlete, just accept that your job is to grow what 10 out of 10 is, but don't expect you to be 10 out of 10 capable every day. Get 100% out of that in the situation that you're in. That type of stuff for me just allowed the support to kind of go, well, let's play today and see what the art of the possible is, rather than requiring everything to be beautifully in place before I kind of go, at last, flawless. I've no impediment to my brilliance being expressed.
Yeah, it's the old thing, isn't it? Never get too high with the highs, never get too low with the lows. I wonder when you look back over your career with Team GB rowing, what's the highlight for you? What's the one thing you look back on and take most pride in?
I think there's a couple of bits. So in 2009, if I get my dates right, Catherine Granger won a silver medal in the single scull at the World Championships the year after the 2008 silver medal in Beijing, which had been a really and Catherine just flew. She hadn't had a great season in the single, but in the final it was unbelievable. She took on the world's best and was leading up until about 1750 meters, and the silver medal that she got on that day, I was blown away by what she did. And so that was just a real highlight in terms of, you're not supposed to do this, and you did, and great on you for doing it, and it was fantastic. And then and I think the first gold medal of London, having been at the training camp in Italy 10 days before and seen the women's lightweight double, the women's double, so the women's lightweight double of Kat Copeland and Sophie Hoskins, the women's double of Catherine and Anna Watkins, and the women's pair of Heather Stanning and Helen Glover. They'd all set world's best times unofficially in training, so we knew they were flying. And so when Helen and Heather went out and got that first gold medal of the regatta and Team GB's first gold medal of the whole Olympics, that was kind of go, this is going to be fun. Because it really can go, well, we know how well that entire squad were going. We knew how well the men's squad were going as well. This is going to be good. And it was just such a great atmosphere around London at the time. It just that, even for me, who often describes myself as dead inside, I was, riding a wave of enjoyment for that week.
Yeah, and I'm sure everybody else, when you talk about the Olympics, they seem to continuously hark back to London 2012. Even in Paris this past summer, it seems to be that whatever we did as a country at that time, we did it right. And of course, for you personally, your efforts certainly didn't go unnoticed. You've moved on to a role with Planet K2 as performance director, and a fairly interesting concept as well in bridging the divide between sports and business, and actually showing that there are aspects to mentality in sport that can benefit business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was doing that in parallel as well through that. So, and that was a great privilege to be able to sort of be stepping in and out of both of those worlds, particularly when sport, you're training the majority of the time and competing relatively little, and the commercial world is competing all the time and having very little time out. So you got this real contrast of, so how do we bring the athlete mindset to the business environment so you're developing and growing whilst you're delivering, and then how do we bring some of that kind of additional ability to kind of stop that business needs to do, because athletes get very focused on training, and I can't stop training, but actually sometimes you kind of do need to sort of focus the energy in a different way as well. So there's really good contrast both ways. But that the application of forensically focused psychology of performance to a commercial environment through individual, through team, and through culture, it's just great fun, because you're on the field of play all the time. If you can get something into behavioural practice, you can make a very big difference in a short space of time, and you get to play with amazingly gifted people who are as gifted as the Olympians, but in their own field of play. And so it's been great fun, sort of helping celebrate human capability in these different environments, and be curious about how do we unlock that, whether it's commercial world, whether it's cancer surgeons and cancer scientists or emergency medicine consultants. It's just been fascinating going across these different environments and supporting people's ability to be the consistent factor in an inconsistent environment. That there's different sort of success and failure, cost of success and failure in play as well.
And we spoke about egos in sport. There's certainly egos in business. Which is the more challenging environment to operate in, Chris?
So again, I just kind of go, they're just different. There's no more. It's just like, and egos are egos, and I quite like egos, because if people really, most things can't be done independently. So the great thing is when you've got high egos around, it's the ability to kind of go, I wonder if you're the best at helping other people get better. Back to that Redgrave philosophy. Because if you can be the best at helping other people be as good as you, maybe if not a bit better, wow. Now you've got another string to your bow, which means your ego can be, furthered even more. But the fact that, it's like the crews in rowing. You can't succeed on your own. You need the other people. So this ability to kind of know there's dependency, but also interdependency. That's where the kind of egos are there to be played with and enjoyed. And that's all about motivation and drive at the end of the day. And that's about tuning into what is it that is really driving me to have an ego that is expressed this way, which is just a similar question to someone who is driven in other ways, who it isn't expressed through that kind of high ego type behaviour.
Well, listen, it's been a fascinating chat. Time has flown by. It's been a great insight into the mentality of elite level sport as well, for sure. I wonder if anybody's listening, are you done with elite level sport now, or could you always be tempted back in?
I think strategically, I think my ability to sort of think about environments and cultures now, and think about how do we help everyone become psychologists in their own right. That's the type of stuff I would find fascinating right now. That's where I think, let's stop outsourcing psychology to specific experts. Let's bring it alive, because everyone sort of, being able to contribute to a culture that is characterized by the types of thinking and mindset and behaviors that you value. That's the stuff that I find fascinating now as well. So yeah, that on that level, I think that's where there's some real fun to be had.
It sounds like the door's just been left slightly ajar.
always ajar, but now it's just a fascination with performance. So it's kind of less the need to get in the sport, but it's kind of go, actually, having seen this stuff over here in this business, I reckon that would work really well in a football club, or would work, fantastically in, whatever, a Ryder Cup scenario, whatever it might be. It's that those culture things are fascinating.
Now you're taking us off into a whole new tangent, and there's a whole other conversation to be had there, which we might revisit at a later date. But listen, Chris Shambrook, really appreciate your time. It's been a fantastic episode, and we wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you very much, Richard, and all the best for the future ones as well.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Many thanks to Dr. Chris Shambrook for joining us on this week's episode. If you found what he had to say interesting and want to find out more, then you can do so by going to our website, scienceforsport.com. And if you've enjoyed this edition of the Science for Sport podcast, then help us spread the word. Share the podcast far and wide, be it with a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. And remember, the more people we get to download this podcast, the easier it is for us to attract top-level athletes and people at the very top of their profession. That's just about it from me for this week. I look forward to speaking to you again on next week's edition of the Science for Sport podcast.
Subscribe to the Science for Sport podcast now, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more insights, resources, and to join the Academy, visit scienceforsport.com and connect with us on social media by searching for @ScienceForSport. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.